crowd, of course, adores their country, but this crowd is also very curious. And we brought you here. You thought to give us a speech or an interview, but the real reason is to know when are we going to vote. They want to know. March, May, tell us enough, we can't anymore.
First of all,
you see, they're curious.
I do have to say, you know, a minute ago we saw the president from Jerusalem from his residence. So
yes.
I said to myself, it's not fair. A president can speak from Jerusalem. The deputy president of the State of Israel, which I am in my ex officio as the Speaker of Knesset, has to travel to Miami, Florida. But on a serious note, I'm very glad to be here. And if I would now say I think that Israelis all around the world should have the right to vote, it will sound like I'm trying to court this specific audience.
Yes.
But
you see,
yeah, they still like it. But
so you think they should vote?
I do have to say that, and it's on record, everything is on record these days, that when I was Minister of Public Diplomacy and Diaspora Affairs, I said loud and clear that I don't think that Israel should be different from France, United States, or Russia for that matter, where citizens vote in the embassies and consulates all around the world. I think that it's something very basic. For some reason, there was opposition to that. I understand there's a broader consensus these days. I heard that members from the opposition, members of Knesset from the opposition also mentioned it in positive ways. So I hope that finally this legislation will pass.
Oh. That's a very nice promise you're giving the Israelis here in America. The conscription bill. You know, we already closed, unfortunately, the newspaper. We should have done this interview a little bit earlier, I think. But do you think you can overcome, or will bring us to the elections at the end?
You know, Boz, I'll tell you quite frankly and emotionally. Sometimes it drives me crazy when people say, you know, there will be no compromise on the conscription bill, Chok HaGiyus, we'll go to new elections. And I ask myself, and I ask all the others, and after the elections, what exactly is going to happen? All the ultra-Orthodox will immediately go to the army, or all the ultra-Orthodox will immediately get an exempt from the army service? What's going to happen? How are we exactly solving this problem, this real, serious problem with new elections? So I think it's high time to accept the compromise. The bill was prepared by the Ministry of Defense. Between you and me and the lamppost, the ultra-Orthodox parties can live with that. Yes, they will protest, they will probably walk against, they will stage a walkout, but they can live with that. And everyone has to understand that, seriously speaking, it's not about all the ultra-Orthodox going to the army. Seriously speaking, and once again, in this case, not emotionally speaking, it's about them joining the labor force in Israel, starting really contributing to the economy, and this is our future.
But as you started with between you and me, and as they're not listening right now, so you can be very honest and free with me, handling a coalition of 61 deputies, already it's difficult, you know, a coalition in Israel. The system is kind of difficult. I mean, would you personally wish to go to elections and finish with it, or on the contrary, manage or succeed in maintaining the 61 coalition?
Well, you know, life is full of paradoxes. In this 61-59 coalition, sometimes the life of the speaker, and even more so of the whip of the coalition, is really a nightmare. But the paradox is that only good legislations pass these days.
Exactly.
The coalition can't bring controversial legislations. They don't have enough votes in many cases. It's enough that one person is sick or abroad or whatever, and there's a problem. So the legislation brought to the Knesset is mostly good social legislation, fighting bureaucracy or extra regulation, things like that. So I don't see a problem, and it totally depends on the members of the coalition, if they are disciplined enough, and if they are not trying to start with what we call in professional slang positioning towards the election and fighting each other, we could continue like that. I don't see a problem.
Anyway, when it comes to you, elections, not elections, after the elections, you're going to, I guess, stay the speaker.
Well, that's something that is, I think, untimely, because I know the polls, you know the polls, many people here read the polls, but once again, we shouldn't take things for granted. I think that we first have to win the elections. Even before that, we have primary elections in the Likud. Surprise, surprise, there are still parties in Israel that have primary elections and decide democratically who will be their representatives in the next Knesset. There are primary elections, there are general elections. We have to make sure that Netanyahu is prime minister, and only then we'll start, I guess, quarreling about positions of each one of us.
Mm-hmm. We talk about politics, about elections, but those last weeks or even last month weren't easy for the Israeli population in south of Israel. And I think of Gaza, of course, and the violence from Gaza towards Israel's cities, communes. And my question would be, I mean, isn't it frustrating? And I look at this crowd, all Israel lovers, Israelis, having Israel Air Force, having F-35, like the strongest plane you have right now, strongest American plane with amazing Israeli pilots. And the Palestinian kite drives us crazy, and we have no response. On one hand, an F-35, on the other hand, a kite. What do we do?
First of all, the situation in the south and in the north is still another reason not to think about new elections, early elections, but rather to keep things stable. And you're asking, well, you're talking about a well-known dilemma. We had, by the way, the same, it was less obvious, we had the exact same. When we were talking about Hamas, in that case, infrastructure, for suicide bombings and things like that, we were much better off than against what we used to call in Israel terror bodedim, when some 16-year-old inspired, inverted commas, inspired by Facebook or Twitter or whatever, would take a knife all of a sudden and go and try to stab someone. We have the same situation in Gaza. They tried with missiles, the Iron Dome gives an answer. They tried with tunnels, they're desperate, we know how to find the tunnels, we know what to do with the tunnels. They tried the Marine commandos, no less than that, they never moved forward with that. With this kind of, it's another type of terror bodedim, with really something that is much more difficult to deal with. But I promise you the answer will be there, and the answer already is there. And at the same time, you know, let's be honest, we have F-35s, we have the best pilots in the world. We don't have pilots who would just, you know, get into the air and bomb 1 million people in Gaza because someone sent a kite. We have to keep the proportions, and we have to first and foremost make sure that our citizens in the south of the country don't suffer. I think the message during the last conflict 2 weeks ago went to Hamas very well. That's why we see less attempts to attack Israel these days.
According to what we heard in Israel, I mean, Israel prevented itself from another cycle of violence in Gaza because of things happening in the north. What can you tell us about that?
Well, it's not a secret that in the north we got used to Hezbollah, which is the exact opposite. It's not about even a terror organization. People refer to it these days as semi-state. Hezbollah has a very strong military structure, but at the same time, I think they are suffering from their own problems in Syria, losing a lot of their force there. And the complexity of the situation is that we all of a sudden have new neighbors on our northern border. Last time I checked, Israel didn't have border with Iran. But Iran, for some reason, has a border with Israel. So geography, I guess, is a little bit different in the Middle East. Having said that, and this is a very good, probably point, I travel a lot to meet my counterparts around the world, and when I get to a certain country, say in Europe, I also meet normally the prime minister, the president, the foreign minister. And they all talk to me about our position, about the sanctions and the Trump administration position. And my answer is always the same. We can have a long, interesting, strategic argument where in the end, the sanctions would work better or some other approach, engagement as they call it, work better. For us in Israel, it's not theory. We know that these days, as we speak, by the way, Vice President Pence also mentioned something about it, as we speak, Iran has less funds because of the sanctions. As we speak, Iran is less able to send terror money to Syria, to its forces in Syria and Lebanon. And this is the immediate influence of the toughening sanctions coming from this country.
Time is short, unfortunately. But I have to ask you, maybe let's get into the most delicate subject we have today, which is, of course, the US Jews and Israel relationship. How much are they allowed, US Jews, to influence our politics, our country, or should you say that on the contrary, they don't have to have any influence whatsoever? And we only have to have expectations from them to support us and help us. How does it work?
Well, I think that every Jew has a perfect right to speak about Israel and express his or her opinion and try to reach out to Israeli, say, elected officials and to express this opinion. Having said that, I don't know what this kind of influence is. We can listen. I think that the Israeli government has to take into consideration the implementations, the influence of certain decisions on diaspora Jewry, to be well prepared, not to ignore it. At the same time, let's be very clear about it. As I already mentioned, the first responsibility of every democratic government, including the one in Israel, is to deal with its citizens, to protect its citizens, to make everything in its power to take care of the well-being of its citizens. Other things should be taken into consideration. They can't be the crucial part of the decision. They have to be kept in mind all the time.
I see. But laws, for example, regarding, for example, the conversion law we had in Israel, don't you think it hurts relations between US Jews and Israel, for example?
Well, I think that some mistakes have been made. Once again, I spoke about it loud and clear. I think that in many arguments that we hear, we are misplacing theological arguments and political arguments. In many cases, we are dealing with political arguments. The Kotel is the best example. It's not about, theology. It's about finding a compromise, and in politics you can always find a compromise. I'm saying that first person singular is the speaker of one of the most impossible parliaments in the world, and we managed to find compromise on many issues. So I think that in all these cases we have to take into consideration, I'll use the same phrase again, that a lot of Jews all around the world feel that there is a problem, the way the state of Israel treats them. Having said that, I think that it's exactly connected to your previous question. For those who are to have this idea that they have to directly influence by vote Israeli officials, Israeli elected officials, Israeli politics, the voting rights go to those who are Israelis, living in Israel, living outside Israel, but they are Israelis. And I think that this way Israeli politics could be influenced by
Mr.
Jews.
Speaker, unfortunately, we have to finish I conclude our interview. 2008, I met you for the first time. You were a member of Knesset. 2018, the Speaker of the Knesset. 2028, President or Prime Minister? What do you choose? Fast, we don't have time.
First of all, well, I think that it's this question, Boaz, as you know, is a prominent Israeli journalist.
That's it. I'm editor-in-chief. That's it. Nothing after.
I'm being asked this question all the time, and it's a great compliment. Because for some reason, and I've been in politics for 22 years, for some reason, before I served my terms as the Speaker of the Knesset, no one asked me whether I want to be President or Prime Minister. So I guess I'm doing something right as the Speaker of the Knesset. I want to continue doing something right.
We wish you all the best.
No, we forgot the most important thing. Chag Hanukkah Sameach. Happy Hanukkah.
כל הכבוד. תודה רבה. תודה רבה.
Thank you.